Hey guys, tonight we begin with the divine chaos and cosmic soap opera that is ancient Egyptian mythology. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with Ra, the ancient Egyptian sun god and perpetual overachiever. Ra wasn't just some glowing ball in the sky, he was the sun, the whole sun. Every single day, Ra dragged his blazing solar boat across the heavens from east to west. No sick days, no holidays, and no working from home. He was, in essence, the original 9 to 5, except his shift never ended, and he had to fight monsters on his commute. By day, Ra illuminated the world, providing warmth, light, and a great excuse to complain about the heat. But by night, oh, you thought he slept? No. Instead, Ra descended into the underworld, known as Duat, to begin his second job, protecting the cosmos from Apophis, a chaos serpent the size of a skyscraper with a serious grudge. Apophis tried to eat Ra every single night, and every single night Ra had to outmaneuver him. Imagine finishing a 12-hour shift, only to be hunted by a giant snake in hell. Every single night. To keep things running smoothly, Ra had an entourage of divine assistants on his solar bark. Think of them like celestial interns, but instead of fetching coffee, they shot fireballs at interdimensional threats. Among these helpers were gods like Set. Yes, the same guy who later murdered his brother. Workplace drama alert. And Mayan, a protective serpent who curled around Ra's ship like divine bubble wrap. But it gets weirder. At some point, Ra decided to retire from direct earthly management. Why? Because humanity, in classic fashion, started talking trash. Ungrateful mortals mocked Ra in his old age, so he sent the goddess Sekhmet to handle it, and by handle it, we mean near-total human extinction. After that PR disaster, Ra took a step back and ruled from the sky, letting other gods pick up the slack. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, agriculture and family trauma. Basically, if you've ever felt simultaneously overworked, betrayed by a sibling, and mildly decomposed, congratulations, you've spiritually connected with ancient Egypt's favorite undead icon. Osiris started out strong, handsome, wise, brought civilization to humanity, invented farming, invented wine, so obviously a legend. People loved him, which, as history shows, is a fast track to getting assassinated by your own brother. Enter Set, his brother, nemesis, and the poster child for middle child syndrome with a gym membership. Set's jealousy wasn't subtle. He literally measured Osiris's body for a coffin, threw a party and said, "Whoever fits perfectly in this mysterious custom-built sarcophagus gets to keep it." Osiris climbed in, because trusting your obviously jealous brother at a sketchy party is peak divine optimism. Set slammed the lid, sealed it with nails and magic, overkill much, and chucked it into the Nile like a glorified fruit basket. Osiris floated to Byblos, because nothing says eternal ruler like being mistaken for river driftwood by Lebanese locals. But Osiris had Isis, wife, sister, sorceress, and the kind of ride or die you only get from divine incest. She found the coffin, brought him back, and then Set stole the corpse again and chopped it into 14 pieces. Yes, 14. Because 13 would have been too predictable. Isis, unfazed, went on a continent-wide body part scavenger hunt. She found 13. The missing piece? His, Pharaoh's scepter. Let's just say she improvised with a gold replacement. Ancient Egyptian mythology, weirdly into embalming, incredibly casual about prosthetics. With a little necromancy, Isis revived Osiris long enough for one magical night. Cue ghost baby Horus. Osiris then respectfully retired from life, took a desk job in the underworld, and became the divine judge of souls. Think, HR manager of eternity, but with scales and crocodile demons. And there he remains, dignified, mummified, and ironically more powerful dead than alive. Moral of the story? Never accept furniture from your siblings, always marry a competent witch, and sometimes the best way to run a kingdom is to run it from the grave. Let's talk about Isis, the goddess who had everything: beauty, wisdom, magical powers, and a family tree that looped around like a Mobius strip. She was the wife and sister of Osiris, which in ancient Egyptian terms basically meant it's complicated but normal. Isis wasn't just any goddess. She was the goddess, the OG multitasker, protector of the pharaohs, inventor of healing spells, mother of Horus, necromancer, shapeshifter, and occasionally bird-headed grief tornado. Basically, she was the Hermione Granger of ancient Egypt, if Hermione had also been into embalming and strategic revenge. Her most iconic move? Reassembling her husband after Set chopped him into 14 artisanal death nuggets. She scoured Egypt for his dismembered limbs, like some divine scavenger hunt sponsored by trauma. She found 13. The 14th, let's just say it was the important part, missing. So she built one, out of gold, then used it to magically conceive a child. You can call it creepy. Egyptians called it devotion. And then she raised her son Horus alone while hiding in the swamps, fending off crocodiles, assassins, and the occasional demon. Picture a single mom living in a haunted marsh, nursing a bird-headed baby while cursing anyone who got too close. And you thought your maternity leave was rough. Isis was also a master manipulator, in the best way. She once tricked Ra, the sun god, into giving up his secret name, which was basically his divine password, by poisoning him with a snake she created herself. That's right. She invented a snake just to blackmail a god. Then healed him, because that's just good networking. She became so powerful that even regular Egyptians started modeling their lives after her. She was a symbol of love, grief, magic, fertility, and I will raise my dead husband, destroy my enemies, and still make dinner by sunset energy. Isis wasn't just a goddess. She was the entire empire's emotional backbone. The woman who said, "Sure, my brother husband got murdered and dismembered, but I have glue, a falcon child, and rage-fueled magic. I'm fine." And now, the Avenger. Horus, god of kingship, the sky, and dramatic revenge arcs. If Isis was the tireless single mum, and Osiris the murdered dad-turned-underworld manager, then Horus was the angry teen trained from birth to punch his uncle in the face. Which, to be fair, was considered divine justice. Born in secrecy in the Nile Delta swamps, Horus spent his early years being nursed by Isis and protected from Set's assassins, snakes, scorpions, and whatever else haunted Egyptian wetlands. Picture Spider-Man's origin story, but with more bird heads and maternal resurrection magic. Once Horus hit divine puberty, he did what every good mythological child does, vowed revenge, and so began the longest, pettiest custody battle in history. Horus claimed the throne as the rightful heir to Osiris. Set said, "Nah, I murdered your dad fair and square." The gods said, "Let's hold a celestial courtroom drama that lasts 80 years. Yes, 80. Because nothing says timeless myth like bureaucracy. The court proceedings included boat races, magic duels, transformation battles, and, yes, one infamous episode where Set sexually harassed Horus, tried to humiliate him with divine fluids, and Horus's response was to catch it in his hand, throw it in a swamp, and then Isis trapped Set's own stuff in lettuce and fed it back to him. You read that right. Welcome to ancient mythology. No refunds. Eventually, after enough slapstick divine warfare to rival a Looney Tunes marathon, the gods ruled in favor of Horus. He claimed the throne of Egypt. His missing eye was magically restored after Set gouged it out in a brawl, and he became the living embodiment of pharaonic power. And that eye? The famous Eye of Horus, symbol of protection, healing, and "don't mess with me, my family invented necromancy." It's still one of the most recognizable icons from ancient Egypt. worn by rulers, soldiers, and modern tourists who think it looks cool on a tattoo. Meet Set, also spelled Seth Sutek, or why is he like this? God of chaos, deserts, violence, storms, and being that relative at every divine reunion. If the Egyptian pantheon had a black sheep, Set set the standard, then probably set the sheep on fire for fun. Born of sky goddess Nut and earth god Geb, Set came into the world already suspicious. He was the red-haired, square-jawed oddball among a lineup of falcon-headed overachievers. While his siblings were busy embodying order, fertility, and cosmic harmony, Set chose vibes, mostly violent ones. He ruled over the desert, which is mythological code for everything awful. Sandstorms? Set. Droughts? Set. Strange political instability that somehow benefits one egomaniac? Definitely Set. But what really made Set infamous was his Oscar-worthy role in the divine family drama. His brother Osiris was beloved, wise, and accidentally alive. So naturally, Set shoved him into a coffin and threw him in the Nile. Ancient Egypt, where your murder weapon is sometimes a luxury casket. When Isis retrieved Osiris's body, Set doubled down, chopped it into 14 pieces, scattered the parts like mythological confetti. Set didn't just commit murder, he invented the deluxe dismemberment package. Then came Horus, Osiris's son, who grew up with one goal: avenge Dad. Set and Horus clashed for 80 years, a feud so long it required divine arbitration, magical duels, and one lettuce-based scandal that's still too weird to unpack before midnight. Despite his villain arc, Set wasn't always the bad guy. In earlier myths, he was seen as the necessary chaos, the brute strength protecting Ra during his nightly battle with the serpent Apophis. Set literally stood on the solar boat, stabbing chaos snakes in the face while everyone else slept. So yes, he's a desert maniac, but your desert maniac. Eventually, Set's PR went downhill. Later dynasties demoted him from misunderstood anti-hero to full-blown enemy of the state. Pharaohs scratched his name off temples. His cults vanished. Even his animal mascot, some mysterious snouted beast with square ears, disappeared from nature, like it couldn't handle the bad press. Next on our Pantheon tour is Anubis, the god of mummification, the afterlife, and that calm guy at every party who stands in the corner silently judging your aura. With the head of a jackal and the demeanor of a brooding funeral director, Anubis was Egypt's ultimate goth before eyeliner was invented. He didn't just hang out in graveyards, he owned them. While other gods were busy with celestial wars and incestuous palace drama, Anubis was elbow-deep in linen wraps and sacred oils, making sure your soul got to the afterlife without detouring through a cursed bog. His origin story? Slightly murky, like most gods in Egypt's tangled family trees. Depending on the version, he's either the son of Nephthys and Osiris, or Ra and Bastet, or someone accidentally left the divine baby at the doorstep of a pyramid. Either way, he didn't let the lack of family structure stop him from becoming the world's first licensed embalmer. When Osiris was chopped up like a mythological sushi platter, Anubis was the one who reassembled him. Not Isis, not Horus, Anubis. He cleaned the bits, applied the oils, said a few sacred words, and voila, first mummy. Basically, Osiris owes his second life to Anubis's ancient mortuary finesse. Anubis also invented the art of the weighing of the heart. When you died, your heart was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Mayat, the divine standard for truth and balance. If your heart was heavier, i.e., full of lies, guilt, or that one time you stole barley, it got devoured by Amit, a crocodile lion hippo creature that looked like evolution hit shuffle. And who stood by, calmly watching this terrifying judgment ritual? Anubis. Unbothered, unblinking, possibly sipping metaphysical tea. Despite his spooky reputation, Anubis wasn't malevolent. He protected graves, scared off tomb robbers, and guided souls with quiet competence. Honestly, he'd probably run a 5-star funeral home on Yelp if he were around today. Amazing service. Wrapped grandma in the finest linen. If ancient Egypt had a class valedictorian, it would be Thoth. Picture a man with the head of an ibis, a bird famous for poking around in shallow waters. Except this one carries a pen, a scroll, and enough cosmic responsibility to make your academic advisor weep. Thoth was the god of wisdom, writing, magic, science, and the moon. Basically, if it required brain cells and celestial precision, Thoth was in charge. He didn't do petty divine squabbles. He did calendars, and spell books, and the metaphysical equivalent of Excel spreadsheets. He's credited with inventing hieroglyphs, which means he's why we have thousands of years' worth of stories carved into stone in the most dramatic fonts possible. Think of him as the god of ancient blogging, except his posts took months to chisel, and you couldn't delete them when you had second thoughts. And it gets better. According to legend, Thoth also invented time. Yes, time. That thing you're currently wasting watching YouTube videos about bird-headed deities. He created the 365-day calendar by gambling with the moon god Khonsu, won 5 extra days, and used them to allow Nut, the sky goddess, to finally give birth to all the major gods. So if you were ever born in late August, thank Thoth's dice game. He also played Cosmic Judge. In the Hall of Two Truths, where your heart got weighed against a feather, Thoth was the one taking notes. Literally. He stood off to the side, writing it all down with divine accuracy, like some supernatural court stenographer. He didn't judge you. He just made sure your cosmic Yelp review was accurate. Despite his intellectual profile, Thoth had a magical side too. He authored the legendary Book of Thoth, a text so powerful it could let you talk to animals, control the gods, and probably get a free latte at the Underworld's cafe. Naturally, the book was hidden, because every society knows. Never give that much power to someone who says, "I'm really into Egyptology." If you've ever owned a cat and thought, "This creature behaves like it knows it's a deity," congratulations. You're absolutely correct. And it all goes back to Bastet, Egypt's beloved feline goddess of home, fertility, music, protection, and randomly knocking cups off altars for attention. Bastet is often portrayed as a woman with the head of a domestic cat, looking both serene and smug. The kind of expression you'd expect from someone who knows she's worshipped and has zero intention of pretending to be humble about it. But don't let the soft purring and feminine grace fool you. Bastet wasn't always the lap cat of the divine realm. In her earlier, more unhinged phase, she was actually a lioness, a full-on mauling, sun-drenched murder cat. Back then, she was known for shredding enemies and chewing chaos like a squeaky toy. Basically, Sekhmet's twin sister after a nap and a bath. Over time, though, as cities grew and Egyptians began favouring hearth and home over carnage and sand-scorched rage, Bastet's public image softened. The claws got a manicure, and the blood-stained lioness slowly morphed into a sleek domestic mouser. Suddenly, she was the protector of households, mothers, and all things soft. Provided you didn't touch her tail uninvited, her city of Bubastis became a hotspot for feline fever. Pilgrims travelled there in droves, not to find spiritual enlightenment, but to pet cats. Ancient graffiti even shows families arriving with literal cat-shaped coffins, so they could properly mummify their purring companions. Because nothing says eternal devotion like linen-wrapping Mr. Whiskers. Bastet was also associated with music and dance, possibly because anyone who's ever watched a cat trip over a harp knows it's both entertaining and spiritual. At her festivals, women would shake sistrums, musical rattles, drink heavily, and celebrate joy, femininity, and the fact that cats do not care about your rules. But woe to anyone who harmed a cat in ancient Egypt. Bastet's wrath was legendary. Killing a cat, even by accident, was often punishable by death. Yes, that's right. Trip over your tabby, and the next thing you know, you're being judged in the afterlife by Anubis and public opinion. Hathor, the original party goddess of ancient Egypt. She had cow ears, a sun disk on her head, and the divine authority to make you fall in love, start dancing, cry uncontrollably, or all three within 10 minutes. Basically, She was the embodiment of your favorite chaotic friend at a wedding reception. Hathor was the goddess of love, beauty, music, dancing, fertility, motherhood, and most importantly, beer. Yes, an actual goddess of beer. The ancient Egyptians were far too practical to leave something that's sacred in mortal hands. Often depicted as a beautiful woman with the ears or full head of a cow, Hathor was not just your average celestial dairy queen. She was also a nurturing mother to the pharaoh, a guide to souls in the afterlife, and the kind of deity who could make even your worst haircut feel sacred. But don't get too comfortable. Hathor had a past. She was once a terrifying force of vengeance under the name Sekhmet, the lioness goddess who nearly obliterated humanity because Ra got a little cranky. You know, typical overreaction. Luckily, the gods had a foolproof plan. Get her drunk. Ra tricked her into drinking 7,000 jugs of beer dyed red, so she'd think it was blood. Sekhmet drank herself into a divine stupor, passed out, and woke up as the much gentler, cuddlier Hathor. That's right. Ancient Egyptian theology includes a hangover redemption arc. As Hathor, she presided over wild festivals like the Festival of Drunkenness, which was exactly what it sounds like. Music, dancing, wine, questionable choices, and everyone pretending it was religious. Think Coachella, but sponsored by temples. Hathor temples were sacred spaces filled with music, incense, sistrum rattles, and probably a few confused goats. Worshippers came to her for fertility blessings, dream interpretation, or just a good cry after being ghosted by a scribe. In the afterlife, Hathor was said to welcome the dead with milk, music, and the same comforting energy as your favorite aunt. If your aunt happened to wear gold and channel raw cosmic femininity, meet Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war, plague, vengeance, healing somehow, and waking up every morning choosing violence. She wasn't just fierce, she was the ancient Egyptian version of an apocalypse button that Ra could press whenever humans got too sassy for their own good. It all started when humans, in typical human fashion, started mocking Ra in his old age. You know, the all-powerful sun god who literally kept existence running. The audacity. Ra, feeling a bit sensitive and possibly without his morning coffee, decided that a gentle warning wouldn't cut it. Instead, he created Sekhmet, a flaming lioness with divine rage, solar power, and no off switch. Sekhmet descended upon humanity like an angry Yelp reviewer with a sword. According to the myth, she didn't just kill people, she delighted in it. She was the divine equivalent of a blender filled with bad decisions and arterial spray. And she was doing so well at her job, humanity was on the brink of extinction within a few days. Even Ra, who again created her, started thinking maybe this had escalated too quickly. So what do you do when your murder lion gets carried away? You trick her into getting blackout drunk, of course. Ra's priests brewed up 7,000 jugs of beer, dyed it red to look like blood, and poured it all over the fields where Sekhmet was rampaging. Naturally, the goddess saw what appeared to be a blood happy hour, got excited and chugged the lot. She got so drunk that she passed out for days, probably dreaming about conquest and regretting nothing. When she woke up, her bloodlust was gone. Sort of. She mellowed out, just enough to earn a side hustle as a healing goddess, because who doesn't want their doctor to also be a literal death machine? Sekhmet temples were filled with lion-headed statues, magical spells, and the vague hope that she'd stay on her meds. People prayed to her for protection and cures, which is ironic, considering she almost liquefied humanity like a protein shake. If the Egyptian gods were a rock band, Tar would be the brooding guy in the back designing the stage, tuning the instruments, and probably forging the drum kit out of nothing but willpower. He's the god of creation, craftsmen, architects and engineers, and he somehow managed to be omnipotent while giving off strong, silent dad in the garage energy. Ptah didn't roar, he didn't smite, he thought the universe into existence, literally. According to myth, he created all things by first conceiving them in his heart, the Egyptian version of the brain, and then speaking them into being. That's right. While other deities were busy flinging fireballs, Ptah whispered reality into form like a celestial ASM artist. He was the patron of artisans, metal workers, and builders. So basically, the one god everyone hoped would stay on their good side. Because angering your construction deity is a fast track to a leaky tomb. Temples dedicated to Ptah, especially the one in Memphis, were major religious centers and likely had the best maintained plumbing in the ancient world. Unlike most of the flashy, drama-prone gods, Ptah dressed simply, often wrapped tightly in a mummy-like shroud, holding a staff that combined life, ankh, stability, djed, and power, was like a divine multi-tool. His skin was often painted green, a symbol of rebirth and regeneration, or possibly just because he worked too many night shifts without sunscreen. Despite being a creator god, Ptah rarely inserted himself into myths. He let others hog the limelight while he quietly invented the concept of limelight. He wasn't interested in love triangles or cosmic warfare. He had blueprints to draw, sacred geometry to sketch. He was, in short, a god for people who alphabetize their spice racks and build furniture without needing to curse IKEA. Even the gods respected him. When major theological rewrites happened in Egypt, Ptah was always grandfathered in. He was too useful to leave out. Some even believed everything, including the other gods, were first imagined by Ptah and then spoken into existence, which would make him the original law master. Nephthys, the goddess of morning, night, and I'll just be over here while everyone else gets credit. If Egyptian mythology were a soap opera, Nephthys would be the character who appears in every episode, solves everyone's problems, and is never invited to the rap party. She's the sister of Isis, Osiris, and Set, which already sounds exhausting, and yet somehow managed to stay relatively sane. While Isis was the divine main character, and Set was busy being the unhinged villain, Nephthys was just doing the work. Always in the background, lighting the incense, whispering prayers, and quietly holding the world together while everyone else threw lightning bolts and tantrums. Her main gig? Protecting the dead. Nephthys was there in every major funeral rite, standing beside Isis to mourn the deceased, sing dirges, and hold hands while ancient Egyptians crossed into the afterlife. If Osiris was the ruler of the underworld, Nephthys was the funeral director with a clipboard and a calming voice, and despite all that, she constantly got overshadowed. Even her most famous myth involves her disguising herself as Isis to sleep with Osiris. Which, let's be clear, is peak mythology weirdness, but also deeply on brand for someone whose love language is, I'll be whoever you want, I guess. From that extremely awkward union came Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, because nothing says complicated family tree like your child being born from accidental necromancy and identity confusion. Nephthys didn't start wars. She didn't chase glory. Instead, she was the patroness of lamentation, the one who stood beside your tomb and mourned you sincerely, even if she barely knew you. She was like the emotionally mature sibling at a dysfunctional Thanksgiving, sipping wine quietly while the others argue about divine succession. Worshippers saw her as a protector, a soft but firm force that guided souls and comforted the grieving. She was moonlight to Isis's sunlight, the cool shadow to all that overexposed drama. And while she rarely got temples to herself, her name was whispered in every sacred rite involving death, rebirth, and the cosmic version of therapy. If the Egyptian pantheon had a moody teen with a cosmic skateboard, it would be Khonsu. Known as the god of the moon, time, healing, and occasionally vengeful chaos, Khonsu is one of those deities whose vibe changes dramatically depending on which century you're consulting. In his most flattering version, Khonsu is a lunar healer. He glows softly in the night sky, measuring the passing of time with every wax and wane. Ancient Egyptians believed he helped women conceive, protected travelers, and even drove away evil spirits, kind of like a holy nightlight with medical training. But don't let the soft moonlight fool you. Khonsu had a temper. Some stories describe him as a bloodthirsty god who fed on the hearts of the wicked. You know, just casually devouring human essence while moon-gazing. 1 second he's healing disease, and the next, he's reenacting a slasher film in your dreams. Duality. He was often depicted as a young man with a side lock of youth, wearing a lunar disk and crescent moon on his head, and wrapped like a mummy, because apparently the moon never ages and never dresses for the weather. Sometimes he holds a crook and flail like Osiris. Other times, he's just busy glowing ominously while contemplating your fate. One of his most famous moments comes from the Khonsu the Traveller myth, where a statue of him is sent from Thebes to a distant land to heal a foreign king. And guess what? It works. So naturally, the locals try to keep the statue. Because who wouldn't want a moon god who cures migraines and glows in the dark? But eventually, Khonsu's statue decides it's bored and returns home, like a magical Uber with commitment issues. Pharaohs and commoners alike prayed to Khonsu for healing, fertility, and protection, but they probably did so with one eye open. You never quite knew which version of him was listening, the divine doctor or the astral serial killer. Before Pinterest made pottery cool again, there was Khnum, the ram-headed Egyptian deity who quite literally moulded mankind from clay on his divine potter's wheel. Yes, while other gods were busy smiting or seducing, Khnum was quietly in his workshop, covered in dust, shaping your mortal form like a committed art major on a deadline. According to Egyptian belief, Khnum sat at the banks of the Nile, scooping up the rich, wet silt and crafting human beings one by one. No mass production, no outsourcing to cosmic interns. He spun each person carefully on his wheel, supposedly forming not just their body but their soul as well. Imagine being handcrafted by a celestial artisan, and still disappointing your parents. Khnum's vibe is a mix between divine creator and overworked kindergarten art teacher. You get the sense he cared deeply, not just about your physical form, but how balanced and functional you were as a person. He even shaped royal children directly in the womb, meaning if your pharaoh had a weird nose or a bad attitude, that's technically Khnum's fault. But here's where it gets oddly adorable. He wasn't sculpting you because he had to. He did it because he wanted to. Ancient Egyptians didn't view Khnum as a distant god. They saw him as a gentle, fatherly figure who shaped each soul with love and attention, which makes the fact that he also had the head of a gigantic horned ram slightly unsettling. Nothing says tender care like being cradled by a beast straight out of a heavy metal album cover. He also controlled the flow of the Nile River, the very lifeblood of Egypt, which makes sense. He's got the mud, the muscle, and the messianic vibes. You can't have civilization without a reliable water supply and a cosmic potter making sure you're molded with at least 2 functioning arms. In temples, Khnum was worshipped with offerings of water, food, and gratitude, because let's be honest, it's polite to thank the god who personally handcrafted your liver. Imagine you're in ancient Egypt, you're pregnant. There's no epidural, no sterile hospital, no soothing playlist, just sand, sweat, superstition, and a labor force of midwives invoking a terrifyingly adorable goddess named Taweret. Taweret, which means the Great One, was a hippopotamus-shaped goddess with the limbs of a lion, back of a crocodile, and the kind of maternal stare that could silence even the cockiest pharaoh. In other words, she was a living, "do not mess with this mother" warning label. Despite her intimidating hybrid form, Taweret was the protector of women in childbirth, guardian of mothers and babies, and the divine embodiment of "don't test me, I'm nesting." She stood upright, belly round with pregnancy, often shown holding the Essa amulet, the Egyptian symbol of protection, which in her case doubled as a cosmic no trespassing sign for evil spirits. And believe me, ancient childbirth needed all the protection it could get. With no medical science, no reliable antibiotics, and a high chance of things going very, very wrong, ancient Egyptians turned to Taweret like a spiritual bouncer guarding the womb. People placed her image on amulets, headrests, bedposts, and even mugs, which basically makes her the ancient world's version of putting Mama Bear stickers on your SUV. She was everywhere pregnant women went, silently radiating, "Try me, demon. I dare you." But Taweret wasn't just about brute strength. She was maternal, kind, and deeply symbolic. Hippos, while cute in cartoons, are lethally protective in real life. especially the mothers. Egyptians knew this. They saw the fierce devotion of mama hippos and thought, yes, that's what I want guarding my labour. And fun fact, even household furniture was decorated with her image. You couldn't even nap in ancient Egypt without Taweret looming above you, like a divine doula from Hippo Hell. Though she didn't have temples or flashy priesthoods, Taweret was beloved. She was worshipped in homes, whispered to during labour, and thanked every time a baby and mother survived. In Sharabas, the Nile is not just a river, it is a god with teeth. Every 10 years, when the river rises too early or too high, the villagers remember their ancient oath, a promise carved in limestone and ritual. Give Sobek a virgin bride, or he will take everything, fields, children, boats, breath. And so, beneath the full moon of the 10th year, the lottery bowl returns to the centre of the village square, filled with the names of eligible girls. The elders do not speak of the past brides. They are not remembered. No songs are sung, no shrines built. The Nile accepts the offering, and silence follows. This year, the crowd holds its breath as the eldest priest reaches into the bowl. He pulls a papyrus strip with a shaking hand. Before he can read it, a voice cuts through the crowd. I will go. It is Layet, 16 years old. Parentless. Born during the last offering year. No one expected her name to be drawn, not even included. She has no family to lose her, no lineage to protect her. But no one expected her to step forward before the name is even spoken. I volunteer, she says again, voice steady. Gasps ripple through the villagers. The priest stares at her, stunned. Child, the gods have not chosen. They have, she interrupts. They always take a girl. Better it be one who walks willingly. Some say she is brave. Others say she is mad, but no one stops her. At dawn, they dress her in white linen and crown her with lotus. A procession winds down to the riverbank, solemn and slow. The water glistens gold beneath the rising sun, but no one sings. Layet wades into the Nile without looking back. The current pulls at her dress. Crocodiles surface nearby, jaws open in reverence or anticipation. The crowd shudders. Somewhere, a mother weeps, and then she's gone. No scream, no thrashing. The water closes over her like a secret. The villagers turn away, relieved, believing they have fed the beast for another decade. But beneath the surface, something else begins. Layet is not dead. She is descending. There is no surface anymore. No sky. No air. No sound. Layet descends into a silence so thick it seems to press against her skin like fabric. But she does not drown. The Nile wraps her in liquid arms, cool but not cruel. Her linen gown floats around her like petals. The deeper she sinks, the warmer the water becomes, not boiling but comforting. Alive. She expects death, teeth, the tearing of flesh. Instead, she is guided. Eyes open, she sees shadows move alongside her, long and slow. Crocodiles, 12, 24. They glide with purpose, forming a procession around her like priests escorting a queen. None touch her. Their golden eyes gleam, unblinking. Then the riverbed appears, but it is no ordinary mud and silt. It is stone. Greenstone. Massive steps descend into a temple carved from the bones of the earth. Pillars rise, chiseled with ancient glyphs, glowing faintly with emerald light. Strange plants sway without current. Bioluminescent fish dart like fireflies. The crocodiles part and vanish into hidden crevices. Layet stands, barefoot, unshivering, on the marble floor of a submerged palace. The door before her is obsidian, veined with gold. It breathes, it watches, and it opens. Inside, a grand hall stretches into shadows, filled with the scent of river moss and lotus. Statues of gods she's never seen, half human, half animal, line the walls. Incense burns underwater, impossibly, curling like smoke inside a dream. At the far end, on a throne carved from jade and bone, sits the god. Sobek, He is not merely a crocodile with legs, nor a man with fangs. He is both, and more. His shoulders ripple with strength. Scales shimmer like oil in sunlight. His jaw could bite through stone, yet his eyes are old, intelligent, watching her with something that feels like hunger, but not for flesh. Layette drops to her knees. "I was not afraid to die," she whispers. "Good," rumbles Sobek, his voice a flood in her bones, "because you were never meant to." He rises, the hall darkens, the walls hum. "You are not here for sacrifice," he says. "You are here for revelation." The throne room was too vast for echoes. Its waters did not ripple. The stillness was unnatural, like the inside of a held breath. Sobek stepped down from his jade throne. Each movement sent low vibrations through the floor, like distant thunder. Layette remained kneeling, heart steady. Her instincts whispered danger, but something colder had taken root in her. Curiosity. "You expected death," Sobek said, circling her like a slow current. "You offered yourself to the river. Why?" Layette lifted her eyes. "Because it would be better than waiting. Better than watching them throw another girl into your jaws while pretending it was piety." Sobek's lip curled into something between amusement and warning. "And you thought yourself clever?" "No," she said. "I thought myself free." Sobek stopped. For a moment, the silence deepened. Then he tilted his great head. "You are not here because of courage, or sacrifice, or foolishness." His voice dropped to a growl. "You are here because your blood carries his name." Layette frowned. "Whose name?" Sobek raised a clawed hand, and the green stone of the wall behind him shifted. Glyphs surfaced, old, scarred, forbidden. A jackal, a scorpion, a serpent of red fire. Set. Layette's breath caught. The god of storms, the breaker of harmony, the betrayer of Osiris. "I'm descended from Set?" Sobek's eyes narrowed. "You are his echo, his ash, his seed." The throne behind him cracked slightly. For 1,000 years the Nile has kept balance, order, sacrifice, but the desert rises again. The sky fractures, gods stir, war is coming. Layette tried to stand. The water thickened, pulling at her legs like honey. "And you," Sobek said, "are not prey. You are betrothal." "To you?" "To what comes after," he answered. "You are the hinge, the key, the bridge between storm and flood." Layette stood fully now. Her voice did not tremble. "I did not come to be anyone's bride." "You came to end something," Sobek replied. "You just don't know what yet." He extended his scaled hand. "Come, Layette. Let me show you what lies beneath the Nile, and what the gods forgot to tell you." The palace was not built. It had grown. Rooted in the silt of forgotten centuries, its walls were alive with moss-veined stone and glowing fungi that pulsed with the rhythm of distant drums. Columns rose like the trunks of ancient trees, their carvings shifting when Layette wasn't looking. Crocodile eyes followed her from every surface, some stone, some not. Sobek's servants were not men. They were shadows with scales. Silent, gliding figures who moved through flooded corridors as if born to the current. They never touched her, but she could feel their presence, like water held in the lungs too long. Days passed, if time could be measured down here. Layette was not imprisoned. She was not chained. She wandered freely, though the palace never seemed to end. She ate fruits that grew on walls, drank from pools that shimmered like oil. Sleep came, but dreams followed, filled with deserts on fire and rivers running red. Sometimes she awoke with water in her mouth, and it tasted like blood. Scrolls floated in glass cases, too ancient for human hands. Weapons of gold and obsidian hung in niches carved into the walls, humming softly as she passed. One room contained a map, not of land, but of currents, of ley lines beneath the Nile. She traced one glowing line that led directly to her village, and continued into the desert beyond. Symbols appeared throughout the palace, the red spiral of Set, the eye with the slit pupil. A woman's face cracked in half, with jackals pouring from her mouth. It wasn't a temple. It was a barracks, a war palace, a staging ground for something that had not happened yet, but soon would. In a vast chamber she came to know as the Heart, great statues of gods stood decayed and crumbling. Osiris with his face shattered, Horus beheaded. Only Sobek's statue remained untouched, coiled, patient, gleaming green. It watched her as she stood there, heart pounding. She was not meant to be a bride in the human sense. She was to be joined, not in body, but in purpose. She had been selected, not for beauty or innocence, but because her bloodline carried the mark of Set. And blood, in this palace, was not for sacrifice. It was for activation. Layet began to feel it in her veins, a thrumming like the pulse of drums just beneath her skin. Not pain, not illness. Something older, something ancestral. The palace didn't just shelter her, it recognized her. Rooms opened when she approached. Doors breathed in her presence. Symbols once dormant began to glow as she passed. The stone knew her. She stopped dreaming of drowning. Now she dreamed of storms, of red winds over cracked desert, of vultures circling a broken throne, of crocodiles marching on two legs. In the Hall of Echoes, she found a pool not made of water, but blood. Thick, slow-moving, reflective. She leaned over it once, expecting her own face. What she saw instead was a woman with her eyes, but crowned in iron and desert fire, holding a serpent in each hand. She stepped back. The image vanished. Elsewhere, a shrine to Set stood half buried in coral and bone. The other gods had no temples here, no worship. But he did. Red ochre handprints stained the stone walls, some fresh, and she began to understand. This was not Sobek's realm by rule. It was his by alliance. A pact made with the god of storms long ago, sealed in the blood of mortals. Sobek ruled the Nile. Set ruled the desert. Their union was unnatural, but necessary. Together, they had built this fortress below the waterline, far from the judgment of Osiris or the scales of Ma'at. Layet, with her hidden bloodline, was meant to restore that pact. Or perhaps replace it. In the chamber of offerings, she found a robe waiting for her. Not white like the linen she had worn to the river, but deep green and crimson, sewn with crocodile scales and symbols of chaos. It shimmered in the dim glow of bioluminescent flames, humming softly when she drew near. She did not put it on. Not yet, but she stood for a long time, staring at it, at what it meant, at what she was becoming. Outside the palace walls the Nile stirred. Fish swam in uneasy patterns. Reeds bent with no wind. And far above in Sharabus, a drought began. The river no longer accepted brides. It was waiting for a general. In Sharabus, the river began to misbehave. The Nile no longer flooded on time. Fish died with silver bellies upturned. Fields cracked, roots shriveled. The priests claimed it was a test. The elders whispered of broken promises. But no one dared mention her. No one spoke Layet's name. She had become a myth before her bones could whiten, though no bones had returned. Mothers warned disobedient daughters, "Don't follow the river." Boys dared each other to touch the water after dark. The crocodiles had vanished too. The silence was worse than the attacks. And still, the offering bowl remained locked away. There would be no bride this decade. The Nile had chosen. Beneath the waterline, Layet began to feel the weight of distance. The palace remained unchanged, its green halls as endless as ever. But something above called to her. A pressure, a pulse. Like the river itself was trying to reverse direction. The robe still waited, still sang. And now, the drums had begun. From the lowest chambers of the palace, those not meant for mortal feet, rose a dull, rhythmic thrum. It shook the mosaics in the walls. The glyphs along the pillars wept red sap. In the reflecting pools, she no longer saw herself at all, only fire and crocodile teeth and a sky choked with dust. She wandered deeper than before. In a chamber sealed behind a crocodile's jaw-shaped gate, she found the war room. Maps of kingdoms that no longer existed. Statues of gods whose names were scratched out. Spears of obsidian curved like claws. And at the centre, a sarcophagus not made of stone, but bone. It was empty. Beside it, an altar bore a single object. A dagger made of river glass. Translucent, sharp, humming with something that tasted like lightning. She didn't touch it. Yet. That night, sleep did not come. Instead, she climbed the green staircase that led to the palace's highest point, a dome just beneath the surface. There, through the veil of the water, she saw the moon, and she remembered. Not her own life, but another's. A man with burning eyes and a serpent crown. A war-torn sky. Sand turned red, Sobek kneeling before Set. And beside them, a woman in green and red. Her. The moon above the Nile flickered behind clouds, but below the water, it shone like a beacon through the palace dome. Layet stared up at it from beneath the river's surface, her breath calm though her heart began to beat faster. Something in her blood was changing. The palace seemed to respond. Walls trembled, lights flickered, glyphs once dormant began to shimmer with soft red glow. The robe in her chamber no longer waited. It called. Its sleeves fluttered in still water, as if impatient. Layet didn't resist. She slipped into the garment, and the moment it touched her skin, the warmth returned. But it was not from the fabric. It came from within. Her veins lit up like river lines on a map. Not pain. Not ecstasy. A recognition. She walked the halls differently now. The palace bowed to her. Doors peeled open before she touched them. Sobek's crocodile sentries sank into the shadows when she passed. She felt no fear, only purpose. She returned to the war room. The dagger of river glass pulsed, bright as a torch. She picked it up. It weighed nothing. At the altar behind it, a circle of symbols flared. Set's spiral, Sobek's tooth, a crown cracked down the centre, a path from desert to flood. Her hand moved instinctively. She pressed the dagger to her palm, but did not bleed. Instead, a drop of light emerged. Red, yet glowing like dawn. The altar accepted it. Stone shifted. A hidden chamber cracked open behind the altar, airless and dry. Inside, scrolls, bones, masks, and a mirror made not of silver, but of obsidian, polished so smooth it reflected not the face, but the soul. Layet saw herself, crowned in crocodile scales and storm-coloured robes. Around her feet, sand turned to mud. In her hands, fire and flood. Not one, both. The daughter of Set, bride of Sobek, balance breaker. Outside, in the Nile's belly, crocodiles began to stir. Not in hunger, but in formation. They swam upstream in eerie coordination, their tails carving prophecy into silt. The time for sacrifice had passed. A new role had awakened. Layet was no longer the girl who walked willingly into the river. She was becoming what the gods feared most. A mortal who remembered too much. The palace was no longer still. Walls once dormant pulsed with green and red light. Sobek's emerald, Set's crimson. The two currents, once held in delicate separation, now bled into one another. Floors rippled under Layet's bare feet. The air buzzed, not with electricity, but prophecy. Somewhere deep beneath the stone foundation, drums pounded. Not ceremonial, not celebratory, martial. Sobek had not appeared since she took the robe and the dagger. His presence remained, heavy in the corridors, thick in the water. But he watched from a distance now, as if waiting to see what she would do without guidance. She understood. He was no longer her captor, not even her master. They were partners now, or rivals, or something ancient and nameless between the two. The crocodile sentinels, once guards, now moved at her command. They followed her through the palace like soldiers awaiting orders. Their eyes no longer gleamed with hunger. They gleamed with recognition. In one chamber, Layet found a scroll sealed in flesh-coloured wax. She broke it. It told of a time before dynasties, before pyramids, when gods ruled not from temples but from tombs, and alliances were forged not in ink but in blood. Sobek and Set had once stood side by side against the upper gods. For a time their dominion stretched from drought to flood, but chaos, even when united, always cracks. Set fell. Sobek retreated. The palace was buried, the pact forgotten, until her. The scroll did not explain why now, but it spoke of signs, omens in the river, echoes in the bloodline, a girl born on an offering year, a child whose blood refused to run red. Layet's hands trembled as she folded the scroll. It was never about her beauty, never about innocence. She was not chosen to appease. She was summoned to ignite. Outside the walls of the palace, cracks appeared in the Nile's bed. Ancient bones stirred in the mud. Lotus blooms turned black. Fish began to swim in circles, then die. And far away, in cities that had forgotten the old gods, dreams of crocodiles began to haunt the sleep of priests and scholars alike. The flood had not yet begun, but the river was ready, and so was she. In Sharabus, the Nile had become a stranger. Where once it danced over reeds and sang through canals, now it sulked in silence. Children no longer played at its edge. Farmers no longer trusted it. The soil cracked open like old skin, and the sky offered only dust. The villagers held ceremonies. They offered figs, coins, milk, even another virgin. But the river did not stir. It had already taken its bride, and she was no longer theirs. Far beneath their feet, Layet moved through the war palace with eyes that no longer belonged to a girl. Her gaze was steady now, her footsteps guided by unseen currents. With the robe on her shoulders and the glass dagger on her hip, she no longer felt like a guest. She was a ruler in waiting. Sobek reappeared at last, not in fury, but in formality. He stood beside her in the Hall of Waters, his arms crossed, his great jaw unreadable. Without speaking, they walked together, through flooded vaults, past empty altars, into the vault of teeth. There, an army waited, not of men, not even of crocodiles, though many were present. These were creatures of fusion, beasts carved from storm and river, bone and clay, wrapped in linen older than dynasties. Some bore shields made of dried lotus leaves, others carried blades shaped like crescent moons. All knelt as she passed. The air trembled. It was not loyalty they offered, it was recognition. The blood of Set had returned, but it came wrapped in something unexpected. Choice. Layet had not been raised in temples or courts. She had known hunger and dirt and the lie of ritual sacrifice. And now she walked the halls of gods not as worshipper, but as equal. In the centre of the vault, a raised platform held a basin. When she placed her hand above it, water rose, spinning, shimmering, showing her images of the world above. Cities cracking, deserts swallowing caravans, priests weeping in empty sanctuaries, but also a girl in another village, staring into the water, whispering her name, and a crocodile watching, unseen. The war would not begin with thunder, it would begin with memory. And Layet, the bride of the river, would not march with soldiers. She would awaken legends. The waters began to tremble. From the cataracts in the south to the delta in the north, something ancient stirred beneath the surface. Not a creature, but a memory, long sealed, now waking. The Nile's current thickened, darkened. Whole schools of fish vanished, reeds withered in their beds. And then, one by one, the crocodiles returned. Not to hunt, to gather. In the flooded chambers of the war palace, Layet stood before the obsidian mirror. Her reflection no longer looked human. Her eyes shimmered like silt. Her skin glowed faintly beneath the robe. The dagger at her side pulsed like a heartbeat. Her transformation was nearly complete. She had not ascended. She had remembered, The palace, once dormant, was now a living thing. Rooms shifted in response to her will. Glyphs carved themselves mid-wall as she walked past, naming her with titles she did not yet understand. The servants no longer bowed. They saluted. In the deepest vault, she found Sobek waiting. He was armoured now, not in gold or silk, but in stone and bone. His body bore the scars of ancient wars, but his gaze was calm. In his hand he carried a staff made from a crocodile's spine, the tip carved like a fang. They did not speak. They understood. Behind him, a doorway opened that had never existed before. It led into blackness that bent the eye, a tunnel not of the palace, but of the gods. No walls, no floors, only echoes and stars. This was the corridor between realms, where gods whispered and mortals shattered, and now Layet would cross it. She took a final look behind her. The palace that had held her, changed her, chosen her, it did not vanish. It folded, collapsed like a mirage. It had given her what she needed. She stepped forward, and the Nile responded. Above, in temples long abandoned, statues of crocodiles cracked open, revealing beating hearts of green stone. The water surged, but it did not flood. It waited. Because what approached was not just war, not vengeance, it was correction. The gods had forgotten the pact. But the river had not, and its bride was ready to remind them. The Nile split, not in flood, but in silence. At dawn, under a sky the colour of wet clay, the river's surface shimmered with unnatural calm. Fishermen stood at the banks, nets forgotten in their hands. Children cried without knowing why. Elders fell to their knees, whispering names not spoken in centuries. And from the water, Layet rose. No longer girl, no longer bride, crowned in green stone and river gold, robed in a fabric that moved like storm clouds and flowed like silt, she stood atop the current as if it were solid. The dagger at her side glowed with quiet fire. Behind her, crocodiles lined the banks in perfect rows. Not beasts, soldiers. Sharabaz was silent. Some fell prostrate, some fled, but no one spoke her name. She walked into the square, where the offering bowl still sat, untouched since her descent. Layet reached in, not to draw a name, but to shatter it. The bowl cracked down the middle, split clean by a single word she spoke in a language older than any temple. The pact was broken, but not by Sobek, not by Set, by them, the mortals, the priests, the cowards who threw girls to the river and called it obedience. Now, the river had returned the favour. From the horizon, winds screamed, hot desert gales, laced with sand and sparks. From the other direction came the cool breath of the flood. The two met above the village, swirling into a storm that never touched the ground, only watched. Layet turned her eyes skyward. She saw the gods, not in form, but in feeling. Osiris trembling, Ma'at retreating, Thoth scribbling too fast to understand what had shifted, because it was no longer their story. Layet spoke again, and her voice carried like thunder underwater, not loud, but heavy. Final. She would not rule, she would remind. Sobek appeared beside her, not as a monster, but as a companion. He bowed, not in worship, but in acknowledgement. Set did not appear. He didn't need to. His heir had already done what he never could. Laid down war without battle, restored fear without blood, balanced chaos with choice. And as the storm dissolved into mist and the villagers dared to breathe again, the Nile whispered through the reeds. The river remembers, and so does its bride. Before kings carved their names into stone, before temples echoed with hymns to Ra, the stars ruled the night. They were not lifeless embers, but gods, shimmering daughters and sons of Nut, the sky goddess. She had stretched herself across the heavens to shield the world from chaos, and her children, thousands of flickering lights, danced across her body. Each had a name, each had a purpose, and each sang a silent harmony that kept the universe in balance. For ages, the stars obeyed. Ra, the sun god, ruled the day, and his order extended to the stars at night. He gave commands, and they moved. He spoke, and they burned. But even in divinity, not all children stay obedient. Among the stars was Tyet, a minor goddess of weaving and patterns. She was not bright, not feared, not carved into temple walls, but she saw more than most. And what she saw was control, masked as harmony. What mortals called balance, she began to see as tyranny. She wove warnings into her constellations, patterns that defied Ra's commands. Forbidden paths, secret truths, old names long buried beneath sand and time. And when Ra decreed that stars could no longer show mortals the way to lost gods, Tyet refused. She rebelled. Her defiance spread like fire through the sky. First one star vanished, then 10, then hundreds. Not extinguished, but hidden, withdrawn in protest. They folded their light inward and fled the visible realm. They would not guide, they would not shine, they would not serve. The night went dark. No stars, no constellations, no navigators for the sea, no omens for the priests. The sky became a cold and silent ceiling, black and blank. Crops failed. Birds lost their migratory rhythm and collapsed mid-flight. Sailors drowned in open sea. The moon wept without company. Dusk spread like a permanent bruise across the world. Mortals prayed louder, burned more incense, spilled more blood. But nothing answered. They cursed Tyet's name, though most had never heard it before. They pleaded for the return of the stars, not realizing that the rebellion above was never against them. It was for them. But the gods do not explain themselves, and the sky, once luminous, now refused to speak. In the city of Thinis, once a beacon of light, now a place of flickering torches and half-buried calendars, there lived a scholar named Pamu. He was born during the first starless season, the year of vanishing light. His mother had named him after the word for cat, not out of affection, but desperation. She believed that, like cats, he might see in the dark. And he did, in a way. Where others turned their eyes from the sky, he never stopped looking. By trade, he was an astronomer, though the profession had become nearly meaningless. Star charts had turned to empty parchments. Temples boarded up their observatories. Priests now warned against looking up at all, claiming the darkness was punishment, not mystery. But Pamu kept watching, not because he expected the stars to return, but because he needed to remember what had been lost. His home was a collapsing rooftop near the edge of the city. Each night he traced the invisible constellations in the air with chalk. He lit candles where the stars should have been. And when others mocked him, he simply nodded. They hadn't seen Tyet. He had. Years ago, as a boy lost in the desert beyond Thinis, he had wandered for 2 nights with nothing but wind and sand. Then, on the 3rd night, something had shimmered in the sky, a single thread of silver light weaving through the dark like a strand of hair. Tyet. A warm, feminine presence had filled the air, not blinding like Ra's sun, but soft, watchful, merciful. The light danced low across the dunes until he followed it back to safety. No one believed him. They said he'd imagined it, but he remembered. Now the world begged for that light. Droughts came earlier, animals migrated in circles, madness crept into the edges of minds. Hope dimmed. One night, as Pamu sat tracing Orion's ghost on the ceiling of his broken chamber, he felt it, a pull. Not from the sky, but from within. A whisper of movement, not sound, as though something had stirred behind the blackness above, something watching back. And when he slept, he dreamed not of darkness, but of thread, being handed to him by a woman made of starlight. Pamu awoke before dawn, though the word had lost meaning. The sky was always grey now, like wet ash stretched thin across the heavens. He hadn't dreamed in years, not properly. But this time he remembered the vision clearly. Tayet, cloaked in strands of light, placing a glowing thread into his hand. When he opened his fingers, nothing was there, but the feeling remained. That morning, as he walked through the crumbling streets of Thinis, a quiet urgency pushed him east, beyond the granaries, past the dry wells, toward the forgotten part of the necropolis where no one dared visit. There, hidden behind broken obelisks and cracked idols, stood the last temple of Nut. It was a ruin. Vines had overtaken the pillars, the roof had fallen in, its pools were dry, its altars bare. But deep inside, in a chamber carved with constellations that no longer shone, a single flame flickered. A blue flame, cold and low. And beside it sat an old woman. She wore robes of indigo dust. Her eyes were milk white, but she saw him before he spoke. "You're late," she croaked. Pamu froze. "You've seen her," the woman said. "She gave you the thread." He nodded slowly. The Oracle of Nut, believed dead for a decade, smiled without teeth. "Then it's begun." She told him the stars had not abandoned the world. They had retreated, fled to the folds between time, where they waited for a mortal brave enough to retrieve one of their own. But it would not be a journey of sky and distance. It would be a journey upward, into the very body of Nut herself, into the divine realms, where gods breathed history into being. No mortal had walked that path since the beginning, and none had ever returned. But Tayet had chosen him. There was a cost, of course. To find one star and return it to the sky, he would have to betray Tayet, bind her rebellion, and end her exile. Only then would the stars consider shining again. He left the temple with the sky pressing heavier on his shoulders than ever before. He had wanted to find the stars. Now, the stars wanted to find him. The journey did not begin with footsteps. It began with a thread. That night, in the silence of his rooftop chamber, Pamu found it waiting, glowing faintly on his floor like a strand of moonlight dropped from the sky. He reached for it, and it moved, not away, but upward, pulling gently, as though inviting him to follow. He climbed, not stairs, not ropes, but light. The thread extended into the air, through the crumbling ceiling, into the dark sky above. When he touched it, his feet left the earth. Gravity sighed and let go. He rose, slowly at first, then faster, into a sky that should have been empty. But above the veil of mortal darkness, another sky bloomed. Not with stars, but with memory. He passed through layers of stillness, windless, timeless. Cloudless fields of cold blue air. He saw no stars, but the impressions of them, ghosts of constellations traced faintly on the inside of the firmament, like chalk rubbed thin. Nut's body stretched above him, vast and maternal, her arms arched across eternity. Pamu floated toward her, the thread still in his grasp. Every inch he rose, a memory surfaced, not his own, but the world's. He passed forgotten gods, cast off myths, crumbling monuments suspended in sky as if lost in a sea of belief. He saw the first calendar, the last priest of a ruined temple, folding a papyrus star map as the lights faded, a sailor screaming at the ocean, lost under the first starless sky. These were offerings, hints of what had been taken. Then, a gate. It was not built. It had always been. Shaped like an eye. Closed. Carved with symbols he could not read, but somehow understood. Only the chosen. Only the willing. Only the one who remembers the light. The thread tightened in his hand. It pulled toward the gate. But something else stirred nearby. A presence. Familiar, warm, and dangerous. He turned. There she stood. Tayet. Not radiant, not monstrous. Simply watching. Not as a goddess, but as a witness. She said nothing. And Pamu, dangling between the world he left behind and the sky that had exiled its own children, stood trembling. Not from fear, from choice. She stood without sound, without light. Yet Pamu knew it was her. Tayet, the star who rebelled, the goddess who vanished, the whisper in his desert memory. Now, here in the space between sky and realm, she appeared not as radiance, but shadow draped in shimmer. She was clothed in threads of collapsed constellations, stars knotted into her braid like old wounds. Her eyes were ancient, tired, burning, and still she said nothing. Pamiu clutched the thread in his hand tighter, the one she had given him in dream. It glowed faintly, now pulsing against his palm like a heartbeat. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Not because of fear, but because truth here did not require words. She raised one hand. The thread in his grip flickered. Then, behind her, the sky cracked. It wasn't thunder. It was a memory of Ra, of decree, of stars punished for disobedience. A burst of flame spiraled into the void beyond, swallowing fragments of sky like it was feeding. It reminded him. This journey had a cost. He was here to retrieve a star. Just one. A sacrifice to satisfy Ra's conditions. One star returned to order, in exchange for the rest to return to the sky. Pamiu looked at Tayet and knew, suddenly, devastatingly, that she was the one Ra wanted. Not a star. The rebel, the symbol of disobedience, the price for peace. He had not been chosen to find a star. He had been chosen to betray a friend. Tayet stepped closer. Her voice, when it finally came, was like the wind stirring desert dust. Dry. Measured. "They sent you to fix the sky," she said, "not to understand why it broke." Pamiu swallowed hard. "The world is dying." "And so are the stars," she answered. "But death is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is the proof that we lived on our own terms." She touched the thread between them. It trembled. "Walk through that gate," she whispered, "and the sky will return. But not this sky, not my stars, only the obedient ones." She turned from him, back into the void. "Choose carefully, Pamiu. What you bring back may not be worth the light." The gate pulsed before him, black stone shaped like an open eye, rimmed with glyphs that shimmered and crawled like living ink. Beyond it lay the realm of the stars, the inside of Nut's body, the divine corridor where the sky remembers. Pamiu hesitated. Tayet's words still rang in his bones, the weight of them heavier than gravity. This wasn't a simple rescue. It was a transaction, his world for her silence. He stepped forward. The thread in his hand stretched taut, then passed through the gate like smoke. Pamiu followed, and the moment he crossed the threshold, memory attacked. It wasn't a corridor. It was a river of vision. Images hit him in waves. 1,000 lives not his own. The first stargazer etching constellations into clay. A sailor navigating by Tayet's glow across the Black Sea. A lover whispering oaths under a sky that would soon vanish. The rebellion wasn't just divine. It was human. The stars had always spoken to them. And then Ra severed the line. Each vision burned like sunlight behind the eyes. Pamiu staggered. He saw the night the stars hid, not from rage, but grief. Tayet, weaving her final tapestry of light, unraveling herself into thread and flame as the others watched, afraid to follow. This wasn't a rebellion of arrogance. It was a sacrifice. And now, he was here to undo it. At the heart of the gate, a final memory awaited. It was not divine. It was his. A child in the desert, lost, thirsty. A flicker of light in the blackness above. A voice, soft as wind. "Follow me." It had been Tayet, not a dream, not hallucination. She had broken the silence for him, and now the silence demanded she be bound. Pamiu fell to his knees. Around him, the sky flickered. Stars, countless stars, watching from behind the firmament like frightened children behind curtains. They waited for him to choose, to save one, or to release them all by offering Tayet as the scapegoat. His hand trembled. The thread in his fingers was no longer glowing. It pulsed like a heartbeat. His. Hers. The gate waited. The sky listened. Beyond the gate of memory lay the court of flame. There was no ground, only light, folded and layered like silk in a sandstorm. Pamu floated toward it, carried by the last pulse of the thread. His feet never touched anything, yet he moved, drawn into a chamber that had no walls and yet enclosed all space. Here, the gods were not statues. They were forces. Ra burned at the center, a sphere of shifting gold and white fire. Around him orbited silent shapes, deities he'd only read of in temple walls now eroded by time. Ma'at, her feather blazing with logic. Thoth, a script etched into the air itself. And beside them, shadowed and watchful, Horus, Bastet, Sekhmet. They had been waiting. Pamu did not speak, but his thoughts were bare, as if peeled open like fruit in their presence. He was shown a vision. Earth, bright again, stars glittering in obedient patterns, fields blooming, rivers flowing, priests singing praises once more to the gods who had been silent for so long. And at the center of it all, one star returned, Tayet, not shining, bound, fixed to the sky by divine chains of law, her rebellion erased, her light reabsorbed into the system she once defied. Peace, yes. Order, yes. But not truth. Ra's voice, when it came, was not thunderous. It was calm, a bargain. Return her, it said, and the night will shine again. Reject the pact, and let the world rot in shadow. Pamu felt the weight of humanity behind him. Thirst, hunger, madness in the eyes of children who'd never known stars. They needed him to say yes. They needed light. But he also felt the warmth of Tayet's glow, quiet in his memory. The warmth that had led him from the desert. Not a command, a choice. In his hand, the thread no longer pulsed. It burned. He looked to Ra, then to the distant edge of the chamber, where a faint shimmer waited. Not a star, not a goddess, a friend. One who gave him direction when the rest of the universe offered only silence. He stepped forward, but not toward Ra. Pamu turned from Ra's court of flame, from the promise of order, from the gods who offered salvation at the cost of silence. He walked toward the edge of the chamber where Tayet waited. She stood in shadow, but not in fear. Her arms were crossed, and though the glow around her dimmed in the presence of the sun god, it never vanished. In the face of erasure, she remained herself. Pamu stopped before her. "I was sent to bind you," he said quietly. "To bring you back?" Tayet tilted her head. "And?" "I came to remind you what it felt like to be followed. Not because you shine the brightest, but because you chose not to." For a long breath, neither moved. Then Tayet reached forward and took the thread from his hand. It unraveled, glowing brighter now, gold and silver spun into one. She whispered words not in any human tongue. The sky trembled, and suddenly light burst outward, not from Ra's center, but from her. A soft, cascading brilliance that filled the chamber like water. The stars, those hiding behind the veil, responded. One by one, they began to flicker back into sight, not in perfect lines or divine formations, but in wild living patterns. They weren't returning to serve. They were returning to witness. Ra's flame pulsed once, then dimmed. Not extinguished, but humbled. Tayet stepped forward, past Pamu, past the gods. She raised the thread and cast it upward, into Nut's vast sky body. It wove itself across the heavens like a scar healed by starlight, and from it a new constellation bloomed. Not one of chains, a loom, a thread, a mortal standing in its center, not worshipped, included. Tayet turned to Pamu. "You didn't bring back a star," she said, smiling faintly. "You reminded them why we burned." Then she vanished, folding herself back into the heavens. This time, not in exile, but in freedom. And as Pamu descended slowly back to the waking world, the sky above him glittered, not with obedient stars, but with 1,000 small acts of rebellion. The stars had returned, not because of Ra, because one mortal remembered what it felt like to follow light freely given. When Pamu's feet touched the earth once more, the air felt different, not warmer, not cooler, clearer. He stood on the rooftop of his crumbling home in Thinis, the same place he had traced phantom constellations every night. But now the sky was no longer blank. A soft scattering of stars blinked above him. Not all, not yet, but enough to draw gasps from the sleeping city below. The stars were returning, not in rows of obedient light, but in scattered waves. Some shone with fierce defiance, others like children stepping back into a world that had forgotten them. They were imperfect, asymmetric, glorious. The people of Thinis awoke before dawn. First the sailors, stepping out to check the windless river, then the night market workers, and finally the temple priests, their mouths open in disbelief. For the first time in years, shadows were cast not just by flame, but by starlight. The elders wept. The children pointed upward and tried to name the glowing shapes, though none matched the old charts. Pamu stood silent, his heart heavy and light all at once. He had not saved Tayet. She had saved herself. All he did was listen. The temple of Ra reopened that morning, but not with hymns, with questions. Why had the stars returned without divine command? Why were some missing, some brighter, some shaped like patterns never taught in priestly schools? And who was the man seen standing atop the roof, bathed in new starlight? Word spread faster than fire. Some called him a prophet, others a heretic. Pamu ignored them all. He returned to his rooftop that night with a simple goal: to watch, not to record, not to instruct, just to witness. Because the stars, it seemed, had chosen not only to return, but to change. They were not just gods anymore. They were stories, rebellions, choices, echoes of freedom stitched back into the night. And high above, one new constellation burned just slightly brighter than the rest. A loom, a thread, a figure standing at its centre, not immortal, not divine, just a man who remembered the light. The stars had returned, but not quietly. Each night, new patterns emerged, strange constellations that had never graced the old maps, shapes of rebellion, of lost gods, of mortal acts etched into divine canvas. Some stars flickered as if struggling to stay lit. Others pulsed with unfamiliar rhythms, refusing to fall into Ra's rigid order. Pamu understood now. The stars had not simply reappeared. They had remembered, and memory, once released, never settles peacefully. Across the land, temples reopened, some in awe, others in fear. Priests scrambled to rewrite doctrines. Scrolls were copied, then burned. Farmers rejoiced as plants began to grow beneath a gentler night sky. Sailors whispered that the waves had changed direction, as if guided once more by ancient light. But with light came conflict. Tayet's constellation shone clearly now, always just a little apart from the others. Defiant, radiant, impossible to ignore. And in some cities, that visibility bred resentment. Offerings were made to Ra to dim her. Old chants were revived to purify the heavens. But the sky did not obey, not anymore. And deep within Pamu's bones, something else began to stir. A new awareness. He had not just walked the path between stars. He had been marked by it. The thread, though no longer visible, remained within him. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could hear the stars speaking, not in words, but in emotion, in pressure, in pull. They remembered him, and they remembered Tayet. They remembered everything. He began keeping a new kind of star chart, not of positions but changes, which stars pulsed differently, which patterns rewrote themselves overnight. His scrolls grew chaotic, tangled, almost alive. The sky was not static, it was adapting, and he suspected it was preparing. One evening, as he stood beneath the constellation of the Loom, a single star flared brightly, then vanished. Gone. Not fallen, withdrawn. A warning? A signal? He didn't know. But the message was clear. The sky was not finished. It had begun with silence, returned with rebellion, and now it was watching what mortals would do with the light they begged for, because the stars may forgive absence, but they never forget betrayal. The stars no longer asked permission. They danced freely now, sometimes in spirals, sometimes in chaos, but always in meaning. The sky became less of a chart and more of a tapestry, woven new each night. Tyet's Loom constellation remained steady near the horizon, never the brightest, but always present, a fixed reminder of choice, not command. And Pamyu, once an outcast scholar, was now something stranger. Not a priest, not a prophet, a listener. People came to him, not for answers, but for stories. Children asked what the new constellations meant. Elders whispered memories of when the stars disappeared, and how differently they felt now that they'd returned. Sailors gave him new names for shifting clusters. Farmers claimed their fields grew stronger under the irregular living sky. No two nights were the same, and that was the gift. Pamyu spent his days charting not where stars were, but why they moved. He began teaching others how to read sky emotion, not prophecy but feeling. A practice born not of Ra's laws, but Tyet's rebellion. Star watching became poetry again, dreaming again, sacred and uncertain. Then, one evening, the Loom flared. A single thread of starlight unspooled from the constellation and drifted low, visible only to Pamyu. He reached for it, trembling, and felt a pulse, soft, familiar. The same energy that once pulled him into the heavens now circled back. A message, a summons, or perhaps an invitation. He didn't follow it. Not yet. But he knew that one day another would. Because the stars had never truly vanished. They had hidden, yes. Rebelled, yes. But not to punish, to teach, to remind mortals that obedience was not the only path to light. Sometimes the brightest flame comes from those who say no, and sometimes the most sacred act is not worship, but remembrance. In the quiet hours of night, when the wind stilled and the sky shimmered with chaotic beauty, Pamyu would look up, close his eyes and whisper, "Thank you for leaving." And then, softer, "Thank you for coming back." Because now, when the people looked up, they no longer feared the dark. They waited for what the stars would choose to become.